To talk about the Daily News, Maurice Mcleod, social commentator and chief executive of the social policy charity Race on Agenda, and Laura Perrins, co-editor of the Conservative Woman website. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Morning.
We've been discussing all morning the tiered system has not come without criticism. Some parts of the country have resisted the tougher restrictions, claiming that such measures can't be implemented with limited financial support. It's boiled down to really Boris Johnson versus Andy Burnham. But I suppose it speaks to a bigger issue, Laura, which is central government. Should it be devolving powers across the local government? Has the pandemic taught us that actually we need more serious local government in this country?
Well, I think so. They're best placed to make the decisions in their local area. Although, I mean, I would even go even more local and say households are the best people to be making their decisions as to whether or not they should leave the house or not for in the middle of this pandemic. So if it comes down to it, yeah, you should make the decisions as local as possible.
I'm sorry, are you surprised, Maurice, that we put this to ministers over the last couple of days, but is it surprising that it takes a week to have a row about what tier an area is going to go into? That feels almost negligent during a pandemic, that there is no clear link up between central and local governments.
I agree, and having sort of clarity about how these decisions are made and how they're signed off and whatever needs to happen, because, as you say, the government needs to be able to move quickly and follow the science and do all that sort of stuff. And if it's going to take a week arguing with local mayors every time it brings in new restrictions, there's going to be a problem.
How do you feel generally, Maurice? Are you an optimistic person about where things are heading, or do you sort of wake up in the morning and think there's not a clear way out? One thing that strikes me is that every time we think a country's doing well, and we might learn a bit from it, you then learn that they're actually struggling in a pretty similar way to us.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's becoming obvious is that we are going to need to take a long-term look at this, aren't we, afterwards? Because, as you say, countries seem like they do well, and then they open up and then they spike. So, you know, we're a long way away from being able to say who's done well and who's not done so well at this.
Laura, how much of this is personal responsibility in the end? Are you a sort of libertarian figure who thinks that people should be trusted to take the right steps, or do you think that in the end the state intervention is inevitable in a case like this?
No, I mean, I'm not a libertarian, I'm a conservative. Therefore, I think we should conserve things that have taken sometimes decades or indeed centuries to build up. So if you're a small business owner, or you're, a second-generation immigrant who has built up a restaurant for decades, and then the government comes along and says, we are going to close you down because of a cold that has a mortality rate of 0.5%. That is disgraceful. You are not conserving anything. I think we should conserve our education system. I think we should conserve the culture and arts, which will be completely decimated by the approach to this, by the utter overreaction by the government to this pandemic. What they are, the first lockdown I opposed, but it could be forgiven, given we knew very little about it. What's going on now is nothing short of criminal, and the only reason they're doing it is the only reason they continued the Vietnam War, is the only reason they continued World War I, is because it's too much cost to turn around and say, I'm sorry, we were wrong, we should never have done it. So they're just going to pile error upon error. And it's Boris Johnson won't have to pay the price for this. All the scientists won't have to pay the price for this. It's local business owners, it's school children who have gone missing, who haven't even returned to school since the last lockdown and are now in gangs dealing drugs. They are the people who are going to pay the price for this, and the reckoning will come, and it's going to be brutal when it does come.
What should they do, though, Laura?
They should lift all of the restrictions, apart from maybe if there's a very, very, if there really is a local spike. I would consider sort of the big events like the football and things, big crowd events like that. You could probably wait a bit longer, but I would lift nearly all of the restrictions and say, listen, this is what you have to do. Wash your hands, keep the space, just be sensible, have some common sense. And if you're vulnerable, we're going to shield you. This is what we're going to do here, and everybody else can get on with their lives. That's what they should be doing now.
Maurice, what do you think?
I think that Laura spoke a lot about things we want to conserve. Number one on those is lives. We want to conserve the lives. There is no economy, there is no culture, there's no anything else if people aren't around. The people come first. So I totally disagree, to be honest. I think that that we have to all act in our own best interest. You know, you can't just say, make decisions on a household basis, because then you get young people thinking, well, I'm not really going to be that impacted. I'm going to carry on as normal and not really worry about whether they infect other people. This is the great leveler, you know, in that everyone can catch this virus. So we need to all act together. Absolutely. What needs to happen more, though, I think, one of the problems is that instead of saying, right, okay, how do we defend this business, or how do we save that industry, or whatever, the money should be going directly to people. We should have looked at some form of universal basic income rather than putting money into companies so that they can carry on kind of employing staff that they probably might not be able to hire back when things reopen, because the economy's changed so much. We should be protecting the actual people.
Let's talk about schools, which Laura alluded to. There's a story today about male teachers and how important they are as role models. Male teachers apparently thin on the ground, and over the past decade, there's been a steady increase of the number of male teachers leaving the profession. Mary Kernock-Cook, former UCAS chief exec, has warned of the long-term effects of a lack of male role models for young boys. If you read into the story, it's actually really interesting, because it's this idea of, for example, in the playground, how the way that boys play, it's being kind of clamped down on more because there are more female teachers, and apparently they don't quite understand how kind of male energy can be harnessed in a good way. Maurice, what do you make of this story? Is it a big problem that we don't have enough male teachers?
I think it's kind of important that we have teachers that from all different demographics, basically. So we need male teachers, we need female teachers, we need working class teachers, you know, all of those things. And we need teachers from different minority groups. All of those things need to happen for kids to see in their teachers someone that they can sort of relate to and look up to. I do think that's important. My fear on this, I mean, I'd like to sort of dig deeper into some of these figures, because my fear is, or my gut feeling is that if white men in particular, because that's how the story was framed, if white men in particular are not going into teaching, it might be because they have other options, and that teaching itself isn't being attractive enough to people. That feels like what might be happening to me.
Laura, what do you think the effect is of there not being enough male teachers?
Well, it's mixed. I mean, I think we should have teachers that should be able to teach. I'm not really big on the identity politics issue. It is also, Maurice is right in that it is. They think it's because the salaries have been frozen, and men are more sensitive to that. It is important to have role models in the round, but I would imagine for white working class boys, it's the lack of fathers which is their first problem, and therefore you're left with trying to rely on male teachers being their role models, but really it should be their fathers first and foremost, or if not an uncle or a grandfather who can be the role model. It's certainly the case that some teachers are very harsh on, particularly this story concerns secondary schools, but some teachers are very harsh on young boys in primary schools. They don't like them being boisterous. I spend a fair amount of time fighting with my kids' school over whether or not they can play football in the playground. So those kind of stories are real. That does happen. Although I think the better schools are more aware of the needs of young boys. For instance, punishing boys by keeping them in at lunch break has got to be one of the worst possible things you can do. But it happens all the time, and they're even more poorly behaved in the afternoon.
Is the broader point, Maurice, here that we don't value teachers in this country in terms of pay or in terms of status? If we treated teachers like doctors, you might find that all sorts of people from all sorts of backgrounds want to have it as a career.
Yeah, sadly so. I'd love to argue with that, but sadly so. I think that we, I've seen some of the teachers in my local area perform miracles during this COVID crisis. I mean, they've really reached out to kids that they know are in trouble or at home or are in danger of sort of falling behind, and they've been doing loads. I've been on food banks with teachers. These people are brilliant. I don't think that we really reward them enough, and sadly, so those who are able to go off and find better paid jobs go and do that. And so I think that's the cause of this supposed exodus.
Let's look at another story which has been knocking around, but it's come back today, ironically enough. The trend for returning to the family home is on the rise. It's what's called the boomerang phenomenon, as young adults decide to save money by checking into the hotel of mum and dad. And is this, I suppose, a question is this a move back in the last resort, an admission of something having gone wrong, or is this effectively just what the future looks like in a world where house prices are so high and salaries are frozen? What do you think, Laura?
Well, unfortunately, I think it will be the future. I mean, most people are moving back to their childhood bedrooms, remember, because this isn't their first choice. It's absolutely financial, and it'll only get far worse for this rising generation because of the amount of debt that's being run up. The fact that the current government has decided to destroy any incoming starter jobs. All of the hospitality sector, of course, would be a lot of the people employed would be 20-somethings and 30-somethings. So it is going to get a lot worse. I mean, it's an utter betrayal of what I call the rising generation.
Maurice, what do you mean? Because I've got kids who are 11, 9 and 2, and you just wonder what the world is going to look like in all sorts of ways. But the idea of how easy it will be to get a home of your own feels very difficult at the moment, doesn't it?
It's incredibly difficult. To be honest, the housing crisis, I think at the root of this is the housing crisis. At the root of this is the fact that unless you can afford to rent in the private rented sector, you're really struggling out there. There's not very much around. So I agree with Laura that it's a shame people are being young people are being sort of forced into doing this. I will say that not every parent has the capacity. Not every parent is able to take their kids back in after university or in their 20s or even into their 30s. So it's only that inequality, I guess, gets even bigger because you can only move back into mum and dad's if mum and dad have got spare space for you.
Maurice, you also want to talk about Belly Majinga. There have been calls for an inquest into her death. People will probably remember the name. She sadly died from coronavirus earlier this year after she was allegedly spat on by someone who claimed to have the virus. Anger and resentment over her death have encouraged campaign groups to ask for more answers. There was a panorama on her last week. Where do you think this can go next, Maurice?
Yeah, I actually joined a demonstration yesterday in Tooting. We made sure that we tried to keep down to 6 people, and we're very socially distant, obviously, because Belly died through COVID, so we have to be respectful of that. I mean, it feels like there has to be a public inquiry into her case in particular. It's so symbolic of lots of frontline workers who lost their lives during the sort of first wave of this pandemic. Questions about whether she should have even been put into a position where she was at risk. These sorts of things need to be asked, and it feels like the family certainly feel like they haven't been, but it's sort of been brushed a little bit under the carpet, and we've moved on.
Laura, what do you make of the case of Belly Majinga? Because, I mean, we talked, there was a lot of talk early on in the pandemic about how we were reappraising our relationship with nurses and doctors and how appreciative we were of them as frontline workers. But I suppose if you're working at a railway station, you are as well. And should you be more protected?
Well, I mean, nobody should be subjected to what this person obviously has been subjected to and then lost her lives over it. I mean, inquiries tend to be long and expensive. If they know the person who's allegedly responsible for this, I would have thought that they can be prosecuted under current law. So I'm not familiar with why that hasn't happened. I mean, an inquiry is one way to go, but as I said, it can turn very long and expensive, and perhaps you don't get the answers that you were looking for.
Maurice, I presume it's all about duty of care, isn't it? And what kind of duty of care is owed to people like Belly Majinga by their employers?
Absolutely. I have to just correct one thing that you said there, Laura. That the investigation found that the person who spat at Belly had never had COVID, so it's not about prosecuting that person because As far as we can see, that incident wasn't related. It's more that she was put in a situation where she was facing the public when she had underlying health conditions. It's more about, as you say, who are our frontline workers and how are we protecting them? And her case is symbolic of that.
So, in your view, because you could actually say this is the sort of thing that will have to be looked at in the overall inquiry into coronavirus. So, because if she's going to stand for a whole body of people, which is public sector workers or people on the front line, and the extent to which they were given protection, the extent to which PPE worked or was provided, all of that stuff, all valid, absolutely valid stuff. But that may well be captured by the overall public inquiry eventually.
I suppose it may well be. The reason that I feel that this has a degree of urgency, we're talking about going into new lockdowns. We're talking about ending up back, hopefully not in as severe a lockdown as we were before. We're still going to have people out there cleaning the streets and working on our train stations and driving our buses. It's a matter of urgency that we work out what went wrong in that first phase. And Belly, as I say, is really symbolic of all those people that lost their lives.
Yeah, and there was a tweet which I don't entirely agree with, but I saw was going viral. Of there wasn't a lockdown; it was just middle class people staying at home to bed, having things brought to them by working class people, which isn't entirely fair. But you can see the point that's being made. Let's talk about one other story, Laura. Over in Paris, people gathered at the Place de la République on Saturday to pay tribute to Mr. Paty, who was beheaded by an Islamist terrorist group, serving as a reminder that the knotty issues of free speech and terrorism loom very large in France, which has this, obviously, the secularist policy that it pursues there. Laura, what do you, now it's Monday, it's a couple of days on, what are you focusing on when you think about this story?
Well, I mean, it's still really a shocking story that a teacher could be beheaded in the middle of France somewhere. I believe there was a priest beheaded as well. It might be 2 years ago now. Yeah. I think there's a lot going on there, bubbling under the surface that we don't, doesn't reach, certainly wouldn't reach these shores in current climates. But I think it's quite a serious situation right now in terms of, obviously, secularism is sort of the foundation stone of the current French Republic, and that will not sit well for a minority of people who do not believe in freedom of expression. Also behind the story was how much social media played in really facilitating this poor teacher's death, because it started there that parents were posting posting shots on Facebook saying this person should be held account. And I believe his killer travelled a considerable distance to carry out this horrific attack. So, I mean, this is the problem with social media, is that it only takes, one person who's willing to make quite a considerable journey to offer the punishment they think is appropriate. If parents are posting, derogatory messages and attacking teachers or whoever they mightn't like at the current time on social media, it's 30 years ago this probably couldn't happen, because this individual just wouldn't know that this teacher had dared to show these cartoons in the classroom. But nowadays so social media can facilitate the most, extremists to do whatever they want.
Yeah, and indeed, Maurice, and France does have this policy of secularization. It believes in a secular state. It's striking that within that, acts of extremism like this do happen.
It's shocking, and what an awful thing to have happened. Absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure that I would blame it on social media. I think that it's difficult, isn't it? Because obviously no one would have any understanding why someone would go and do this. I think we should be looking at mental health, to be honest. I think that you need to be questioning someone's mental faculties if they think that reacting to what was considered a slight or an insult to their religion is something that you react to in this way, in this very, very extreme way. But I would say that as teachers, as educators, having a think about the sorts of things that you're saying and how people might react. I'm a journalist. I believe in free speech. I hate the idea of anyone having to even be mindful of things that they say. But on this issue, I can imagine that that maybe more fortunately have gone into is this the right sort of thing to be teaching kids in a class? Have I approached this in the right way? Having said all of that, nothing justifies the horrible thing that happened to Samuel Paty. I'm glad folks have come out to show support for him.
Maurice Mcleod, thank you very much indeed, social commentator and chief executive of the social policy charity Race on the Agenda, and Laura Perrins, their co-editor of the Conservative Woman website. People have been tweeting